back to Stockholm. Well, we're not actually going to Stockholm, but we're going to a game from the Stockholm Snowballs with the white pieces in Agrest. Very strong women's international master, playing against Raphael, one of the Ninja Turtles, and Raphael is Matej Sebenik. I'm not sure if I mispronounced that name. Hey everybody, welcome to the halftime show after round 2 of the Pro Chess League. It was a really exciting start to the day. International Master Lawrence Trent and I will be doing the call for the Atlantic Division, which should start at 6:30 Eastern Time. That's 3:30 Pacific. So we'll be late across the pond for Lawrence. He's taking his pre-match siesta, but we'll be there for that match. And what an exciting day it's been thus far, with several close matchups. And in the earlier rounds of the day in the Eastern Division, we actually had some really upsetting moments. And I'm going to start with this one right here, where we see with the black pieces, you see Baek 04, that is Nodirbek Abdussatorov. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that name. I'm trying my best. But he had the black pieces in this position, and he was playing Grandmaster Milas Knep from the Estonia Horses. And here, in this position, well, black looks great because black has this pawn on h3, and if you can just get a few more moves, first you might want to bring your king into the action, but of course you want to support this pawn on h3, potentially with the rook. So black started with the move king f6, which makes perfect sense because at first glance it looks like, well, this pawn on h3 is just lost, right? Why would black give up a nice far advanced passed pawn? But rook takes h3 is problematic because after rook takes h3, then there's simply rook a3 check, picking up the rook on h3. Now it's important to note that if this king went to e6, this would actually be a blunder because now rook takes h3, there's rook a3 check, and after king to e4, you cannot take this rook on h3 because note that this king has 0 moves, and that would be a stalemate in the center of the board. So that's something that everyone should keep an eye out on in these kind of tricky rook endgames, that yes, the king can actually be stalemated in the center as the rook cuts off the king's mobility. But back to the game. King f6, okay, rook h7, rook a2. Now the threat is to push this pawn, and you try to do that quickly. King e4, h2, and with 2 pawns to distract the king, of course, it's easily winning for black. Rook h6, here comes the king, and this is just straightforward victory time because now the king supports this pawn. After king to f1, rook h8, of course black is now won. You just go king to g1, and after rook g8 check, black blocks with the rook on g2, and that's just all she wrote. So totally winning for black, except for the fact that 13-year-old Nodirbek Abdussatorov, again, I'm sorry if I mispronounced the name, he flagged in this position. So a brutal loss for black in a completely winning position, and that was one of the earlier matchups of the day. He was very upset, as people could see, and just a nicely played endgame that went wrong at a critical moment because he did not get his move off in time. So moving on over to another match, we saw Grandmaster Yannick Gozzoli, a popular streamer here on Chess.com and on Twitch. He had the black pieces against Grandmaster Diptayan Ghosh. Diptayan Ghosh with the white pieces plays for the Mumbai Movers. Black, Yannick Gozzoli, plays for the Norway Gnomes. And Magnus Carlsen was not playing because he was busy out in the Netherlands. He's playing in Wijk aan Zee, and he shares the lead there with Grandmaster Nishgiri and Shakhriyar Mamedyarov. So he's busy. He did play last week, and they missed him because, unfortunately for Norway, despite the fact that they had Hammer, Hammer played very well with 3.5 out of 4. This guy right here, as I bring him up on the screen, he just could not get the job done. Well, sorry, he got the job done, but his teammates could not hold the fort as well. So the team lost 8.5, 7.5. In fact, a missed opportunity in the last game between the youngster on board 4. He could have played for a draw. Instead, he didn't take a repetition and, in fact, lost the game. So back to this game here. This is a phenomenal game where Hammer with the black pieces plays quite naturally to start. And so he, very typical setup here against the King's Indian attack. So you make a chain, right? This b7 to d5 chain blunts this bishop on g2, and black gets his own bishop out, so that way when eventually he makes a move like e6, the bishop is not caught on c8, and that would be an ugly piece. So he's getting that piece out, and okay, h3. Oftentimes black wants to take on f3 anyway, so now white is spending a tempo to invite that capture. And we see an exchange on f3, and yeah, black's just developing normally. Sure, white has the two bishops, but where's the harm after this queen trade? Black has knight b to d7, and so white with his bishop on f3, that is the second bishop. Black does not have a light square bishop, but what's it doing? What's its future? You know, where is it going? How is it going to get open space? Bishops need open space for their activity. So right now it's a perfectly normal position, and as we see, black has three minor pieces developed to just this one bishop on f3 and then this rook on d1. So black is doing quite decently. Knight d2, castles queenside. So castling on opposite sides, normally with queens off the board, doesn't mean an attack is coming. It's just that this move develops the rook in one go, right? Instead of castling kingside and then having to eventually develop a rook to d8 because that's the lone open file, black does so in one turn by castling queenside where there's absolutely no risk. So castling queenside, king g2, and all these moves are pretty normal. But already black seems to be totally level because at any moment can consider capturing the bishop on f3, and that gets rid of the two bishops. Black is castled, king is safe. Everything seems to be going black's way. So a nice setup by hammer, and bishop b4 is a nice move. So of course the immediate threat is this knight on d2, but you're provoking a weakness, and that's often how elite players win games. They say, please make a move like c3, that way my knight can take control of this d3 square, and if that knight plants itself on d3, you're going to have trouble with this bishop on c1, this pawn on f2, once this bishop retreats, let's say to c5, or even all the way back to e7. But the point holds that once this knight gallops into d3, this bishop will be stuck to c1, protecting b2, and clearly this knight will be the most active piece. So c3 was not played, rook e2. But look how many moves white's played with rook d1 to e1 to e2, kind of awkward, not really doing too much. h5. Well timed by hammer, just trying to gain some initiative over on the king side, and now threats like g5 to g4 would be disastrous for white because the bishop on f3 actually has nowhere to go, right? It's completely stuck, so attacking it will indeed trap it. a3, okay, kicking the bishop, and just bishop to e7. Well, you definitely do not want to capture that knight on d2, giving white two bishops versus two knights, and especially that bishop would go snake over to c3 and attack the knight on e5. So h4. And now knight to g4. So h4, of course, the point was to stop the move g5, and hammer takes advantage of the square it no longer protects, and that's g4. So knight g4, knight to b3, bishop f6. Everything is going black's way. It just seems so hard to make a move for white because the natural move like bishop to f4, well, you always have to be concerned about this pawn on b2. So after bishop to f4, well, knight c4 is certainly tempting. So is knight g6, attacking the bishop, attacking the pawn on b2. And as we can see, it's black who is sort of striking first. And I shouldn't overstate, how nice black's position. It is very nice, but it's not like white should be totally lost or anything. It's just that it seems like the plans are much more natural from hammer's perspective. So c3, rook d3, and now they're pretty clear problems, right? This bishop on f3 is under attack, and there's no easy way to defend it because, okay, you definitely don't want to bring your knight back to d2. It's very passive. If you bring to d4, it can always just be attacked by the move pawn to c5, removing the guard from the bishop on f3. So bishop g4, but now h takes g4. So this transition has definitely helped black because the idea is simple. Knight to f3, pawn to g5, break open the position for this rook coming down the h file. And this f3 square is a great, great stronghold for black to have. So bishop f4, knight f3, knight c5. Okay, kicking this rook from c5. The problem is knight d2 doesn't actually attack the knight because I can always just take back with the pawn, delivering a check. So knight d2 is not offering the trade that white would like, and g5 would still be quite powerful after knight d2. So knight c5, but just rook to d8. e5, bishop e7, knight e4. So covering the g5 square and trying to say, okay, if you go g5, now I can start capturing with all my pieces. So g5, I can take, let's say, the bishop first. And now, since you have to get rid of this knight, black is not in time to deliver the important checks on the h file. So a move like rook h5 can just be met by the move rook to h1, offering the trade of rooks, and now black is not in time to seize that huge initiative. So g5, of course, was not played. Instead, rook h5, a great move. From start to finish, Hammer played excellently. And now the pawn e5 is directly under threat. You can decide to double the rooks in advance if you want before making a move like g5, and that makes a move like rook to h1 impossible, because rook h1, well, I didn't just mention that this pawn on e5 is under attack, of course it is, but also after rook h8, you're facing g5 immediately, and you can never take with the h-pawn with the rook on h1 hanging at the end of those variations. So instead, knight d6 check, but this doesn't actually help at all, because after e5, here Hammer gobbles up d6. Okay, now we restore material equality by taking on a7, but after g5, it's all she wrote. I mean, rook h1, f5. Look at this pawn storm happening, and just a few more moves here that you take on h4, and the job was done. And it's worth noting that after pawn takes g5, that the idea is not just to take back this pawn on g5, which probably is still pretty decent for black. Just look at this. This king is in a bad way, and this knight on f3 has boxed it in. So rook to d1 check. Only move that doesn't lose material is king to g2, and after rook g1, that's checkmate. So it's just worth noting, this is actually quite a thematic checkmate. It's definitely been seen in many puzzle books, in many games in the past. So Hammer just brings home the win very quickly after takes, and f4. And so he cuts this king off from ever escaping through g3. Not the h3 square, but the h4 pawn, of course, is under attack. And this is just a very straightforward finish that I'm just going to breeze through here. And rook d1, game is over. So really nice win by Hammer. He tried his best. He had 3.5 out of 4 for the gnomes, but unfortunately for him, he could not save them in their match. Let's start we're going to start jumping over the, and I hate to get all over the place, but let's go to this game here between Hrant Melkonyan and Igor Kovalenko. Melkonyan plays for the Armenia Eagles. Kovalenko plays for the Riga Magicians. And unfortunately for Riga, Kovalenko was not a magician today. He actually struggled mightily. And it's worth going back to this position here after queen to e2. And from black's point of view, it looks like you've just launched a deadly attack. In fact, checkmate is in short order after queen takes f1. And if you move the knight, say to knight g3, well, of course, queen h2 is checkmate in 1. So black is the one who looks like he's attacking. So Kovalenko probably thought that he was in good shape, despite the fact this is one move away from queening. But queening, well, again, this is just checkmate, because after queen f1, you have to block with the bishop, only move, and queen takes g1, again, is another checkmate. So what do you do here from white's point of view? You have a pawn that's very close to promotion, but unfortunately you're getting checkmated before it becomes a young lady on the 8th rank. So what Melkonyan did here was queen f5 check, a lovely saving move. And the point is that if a king takes f5, well, you're giving me a free queen, aren't you? Knight g3 check, you win back the queen, and black is not in time to stop white from promoting. And the reason why is after king e6, it looks like, well, I take back the queen on e2, king comes to d7, covers the queening square, and black has 3 pawns to just 2 for white, and black should be the one ahead here. But wait a second. You've heard of intermediate moves? Here's one of them. After king to e6, you queen with check first. The king has to move, and after that, you can pick up the queen on e2, and white goes up a full queen. So that's a nice shot that Melkonyan found here with queen f5 check. And after king f7, queen d7 check, repeated, probably just to gain 2 seconds, or maybe just didn't see the win right away. I'm not sure what the time situation was at this point, and found the resource queen h3. And now, actually, the game is quite simply over because black has no threats whatsoever. The queen on h3 covers all of the checkmating squares, and now c8 queen is coming, and after g4 trying to distract the queen, well, queen h5 check forced a resignation because look at this king. It only has 2 legal squares, either to g8 or to e6, and no matter where it goes, c8 is queen with a check, and so checkmate ensues in short order. So that's a very nice finish for Melkonyan, and that was a pretty tight match that they had between Armenia and Riga. Well, it was for a while, and then all of a sudden, Armenia ran away with it. So unfortunately for Riga, they'll have to wait till next week to score a victory. And part of the reason why is if we pop over to this game here between Zavin Andriasian with the white pieces playing for Armenia, and black, we have, who do we have here? I'm looking at my notes. Toms Cantons of Riga Magician. So with the black pieces, Toms was doing extremely well here, and he made this pretty bad blunder with knight to e4. So if black does something else, say queen to c4, which attacks the rook on e2, this pawn on e6 is still defended, you might note that black is up a pawn, and it's not like white's king is that safe either. And after a move like queen to c4, there's definitely potential for sacrificing on d4 to get rid of this pesky bishop, and after this, pawns will fall. And of course, as noted, the rook on e2 is directly under threat. So queen c4 was a good looking move. Knight e4, on the other hand, missed. Rook takes f5. And the point of rook takes f5 is, well, if you take e takes f5, well, that's a queen that can be captured without protection. And if you take with the rook on f5, well, that's just checkmate in one move. So the rook is immune on the f5 square. And it looks like from the game score, I don't have any more moves here, that black threw in the towel. But that would be a huge mistake. And the reason why it's such a mistake, well, it looks like, let's say black makes a normal looking move like rook to d7, that okay, we're defending our rook from the direct threat of queen takes f7 check, but you know, maybe rook takes e4 is the threat, and after queen takes e4, there's rook f8 check, right? Opening the queen to the queen on e4, white goes up material because a queen and bishop is more powerful than two rooks, and so that would be a winning edge. However, what black must have missed, or maybe black was just disgusted, or well, it was that point in the match where it was already over, the move rook to c7 is a good saving chance. And the point is that now the queen on c6 is defended. So rook takes e4 still looks like it wins that piece, because after queen takes e4, well, of course, there's still rook f8 check. You've done nothing to stop it. But after rook c7, can't black just take that rook on f5 now? What black has done is defend the queen on c6, and so despite the fact that the queen on g6 can capture that queen, well, it's defended, you're not losing material, and in fact, it's black who is the one who is actually gaining material in this given position. So kind of a weird resignation. I don't have the time situation in front of me. You know, maybe black was in time trouble and just called it a day, called it a match, was just over with it. But rook c7 here looks like black can play on. So sort of a shocking turn of events here. I was surprised to see that in the match, and you know, just kind of odd. So I actually forgot to put up my image of Nodirbek Abdussatorov, who's playing for Volga Stormbringers, and we showed the game earlier, but it's worth noting that this is a very young, very talented grandmaster. And just going over to the chats for a second as I, well, before I move to my next game. You know, it's just really just a fascinating player this guy is. And he had a really good day, despite the fact that he lost that game on time. He played very well against Grandmaster Alexander Onashuk, and unfortunately for him, he just couldn't quite make it. So, all right, the chats seem to be at least decently active for the moment. So thank you everyone for watching. You know, again, this is just the halftime show before we get to back to the commentary when the next division, the Atlantic Division, gets underway. And I'm happy to answer any and all questions, but I did want to go through the action before I went to answering questions because there's so many interesting games that happen. So another moment that's worth our attention is this game between Gawain Jones with the white pieces. Gawain is on the London Towers. He was playing international master John Victor Gunnarsson from the Reykjavik Puffins. And Gawain Jones is playing in the Tata Steel Masters tournament. You may have seen his game against Magnus Carlsen from the other day. He was up a piece in a Sicilian, and then unfortunately for him, he just started going awry with every single move, and it just was an unfortunate loss after such a promising beginning. But here in this game against Gunnarsson, knight f6 check. Looking very nice for white. Note the material is that white has a queen for a dark squared bishop and two pawns. So that's a huge material imbalance. And from black's point of view, well, if you go king f8 now, you lose this rook on e8, so that's a material loss. So bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, and this kind of shocked the commentators. It shocked Danny Wrench and Jennifer Shahade, because they were saying, well, with this queen on f6, there's no bishop on g7, so rook and queen can just team up and deliver a checkmate, and it looks unstoppable. And after knight d7, the move queen to b2 is made, and well, okay, it makes sense. Now I'm going to get this rook here and try to go for checkmate. My queen stays on this long diagonal, but let's go back a second. What about queen takes f7 check? This is a head scratcher. King h8, rook h4 is checkmate in 2. And for most of you watching, I don't think you would miss this checkmate in 2. It's quite basic because the queen and the rook team up together on this pawn on f7. There's nothing protecting it. And that's a forced checkmate that was overlooked by a very strong grandmaster in Gawain Jones. And yes, he did still go on to win the game. And the attack is still instructive because black's king is unsafe. Bishop f5, or the bishop on c2 was under attack. g4, kicking that bishop once more. Maybe black could consider playing g5 just to get this bishop to a square on g6, but g5 is always a risky move. And after bishop e6, queen c1, well, that queen jumped over there into the attack. And so, okay, this king kind of ran around for a bit, and it got forced back to f8, because if it goes into d6, well, there's always going to be rook d3 check, queen e3, things like this, where the king, even if it escapes to c7, it's not going to escape for long. The position is just way too open. So king to f8, rook h8 check. They did a little kind of ring around the rosy for a bit, and here bishop c6 was a very good move. And the point of bishop c6 is that, well, black is totally paralyzed. And what white's idea is to go queen f6 and rook h8 checkmate. And the way to do that is to remove this knight on d7. That knight is defending the f6 square, which is preventing white from jumping in and delivering checkmate. So Gawain Jones did finish his opponent off. He missed the mate in 2. It was a very surprising oversight, but good for him for rebounding and not getting in his own head and finishing this game off. So that was just an interesting moment in this one. Sorry to hop around a bit, but let's go over to this game with Georg Meier. So everyone's favorite Georg Meier. He's hugely popular here on Chess.com. I have an image of him playing for the Stockholm Snowballs in the Central Division. Georg is very, very popular. And I'm looking in the chat here, the Twitch chat. People are saying solo Robert with a little sad face. And, I didn't necessarily want to go solo, but sometimes when your partner is gone, you got to do what you got to do. I'm doing this for the fans. And so Danny left me for greener pastures. No, he's just busy for the moment. He had to do an earlier shift, but, he's my partner in crime, and I'm going to miss him for the moment. And, all right, so, whoa, what's going on with the screen here? Just trying to fix this up. Sorry, I clicked on something wrong. But okay, so in this position, we saw that Georg Meier, he was in the black pieces, and everything is symmetrical here. The pawn structure, nothing is really happening. Seems like, hold on, is the stream going wrong here? Let's make sure it's, looks a little off. Let me see if I can fix that. Sorry about that. Just trying to, maybe I gotta, I don't know what's going on. It looks like the game kind of messed it up here. So maybe it's just, I'm just trying to see what's going on here. Sorry about that. Give me a moment. Well, I guess in the meantime, while I fix this, I have to talk about the, that's why I'm on the wrong page. Sorry about that, guys. Clicked on the wrong thing. So here we are. Now it should be fixed. Sorry again. I got to stop saying sorry. But back to the real deal. So Georg Meier with the black pieces. He is in a symmetrical pawn structure, gets a much lower rated player. And to give the player's name, I wrote it down. Where is this game? Georg Meier is black. Why can't I find you? Oh, Luka Skuhala from the Ljubljana Turtles. Sorry if I mispronounced the name of Ljubljana. I listened to it earlier, but it's a tongue twister for me. And okay, with the black pieces here, of course he's attacking the queen over there on f3. Black looks a teeny bit more active, just perhaps because the knight on h4 is attacking said queen. And but the white pieces retreated queen d1. In general, this came from an exchange French defense. Georg is a renowned French player, Georg Meier, and his opponent said, I'm just going to exchange and try to make a draw. And so that can be a good strategy when you're a much lower rated player and you're playing Stockholm's strongest. So in this position, g6, queen c1, and boom, bishop takes h3. So if white didn't allow bishop takes h3 because the queen on d1 was protecting the f3 square, but by moving over to c1, well, now bishop takes h3 is possible because f3 is now unguarded once the pawn takes on h3. So rook e8, g takes h3. And Meier goes queen to d7, hoping that in one more move, this queen is joining the action, queen takes h3, and then from there, there's knight f3, checkmate, and queen g2. Unfortunately for Meier, after king h2, the pawn h3 is defended, and knight f3 check, king g2, knight h4 check. Well, this is just a draw by repetition. And I know the commentators were going crazy, and they were looking at the sacrifice, but a nice save by the player with the white pieces, just that the position was so equal, so dry, that despite the sacrifice, it just wasn't enough. And we move on from that match, which was between the London Towers and the Reykjavik Puffins. And, well, Reykjavik won that one, 8.5, 7.5. Sorry, why am I talking about London Towers? I was thinking back to Gawain Jones. I forgot to mention that the Reykjavik won that match despite Gawain's win in that one. But in Stockholm versus Ljubljana, it was 8.5, 7.5 in favor of Stockholm. So Stockholm, this half point almost cost them, but they were able to pull through with the rest of the team and not have a loss in this week. And I wanted to jump over to the Delhi Dynamite. They were playing in the early matchup against Oslo Trolls. And believe those matches started at 11 or 10 a.m. 10 a.m. Pacific, if that's right. 11 or 10, I'm already forgetting. But let's go over to Grandmaster Salem Saleh playing for the Delhi Dynamite. He is the strongest player in the United Arab Emirates and the only Grandmaster from the UAE. Extremely strong, very common to see him here on Title Tuesday events. And what happened here? Well, at the end of the game, there are opposite colored bishops on the board. Black is up 2 pawns, but black has to resign because this rook on d8 cannot be defended any longer. There are 2 rooks attacking it. There's only 1 black rook defending. The king on c7 is being pushed away. And so how did this happen? If we just scroll back a few moves to this point here, well, white has sacrificed quite a bit of material, right? Because black has 7 pawns, white only has 4. So a 3-pawn advantage for black. But the problem for black is, look at this king on c8, right? The queen on c1 is aiming through that knight on c4, the king on c8. If the king starts trying to run to the corner, well, you're still going to have problems with an open a file. So it's not as if there's easy safety to be found. But knight b3 is definitely not the way to find safety, because after rook takes a7, you've added another piece to the attack. And so bishop f5, taking this knight over here on c4, and all of a sudden the game is lost for exactly the reason that happened in the game, with the check ending up on f4. So what could black have done here? You have to realize that this check is coming on f4. So do you start with the move king to b8, just getting out of the way? I mean, the position still looks very iffy after the move queen to a1, and the bishop can always come retreat to f4, where it gives a pretty important check. So, it's a very tough situation for black, but this was not the way out, because bishop f5, take on c4, trading everything, and now rook a8 check, king c7, bishop f4, that's game over. Again, the king needs to move to c6 or to b6, and then this is a free rook. White goes up a rook for 2 pawns, but the rest would be easy. So a nice win there for the Delhi Dynamite, and a very important one. In general, this is the Delhi Dynamite. They won their match over Oslo, and so they could use all the victories that they can get. And let's see, what else do I have prepared for you? A couple more games here. If we go to the game back to Stockholm. Well, we're not actually going to Stockholm, but we're going to a game from the Stockholm Snowballs with the white pieces, Ina Agrest, very strong women's international master, playing against Rafael, one of the Ninja Turtles, and Rafael is Matej Sebenik. I'm not sure if I mispronounced that name, but he had a bad position here with the black pieces. He's down a minor piece. So this came from a Sicilian, a dragon, and white is up a minor piece. And for what? 1 pawn here? Black is 5, white is 4. So things are looking terrible for black. But somehow, some way, if we go through this game, things somehow went wrong for white. And that's now a full piece. Now it's a piece and a pawn up. And black is just absolutely toast. So the Ina Agras is just crushing Sebenik. And wait a second, rook to d7. Now something to keep your eye on. Whenever you have this structure, pawns, double pawns on the knight's file, that this is, you see this from time to time, where look at these squares, right? If is black's move, queen e1 check, back to a5, is an unstoppable draw because white has to go from a2 back to b1. Unfortunately for Ina, she went rook d7 here, which is logical in the sense that it attacks checkmate in 1 on b7, puts the queen and rook in a row, but queen e1 check, king a2, queen a5, and so on. So the game actually ended in a draw despite the fact that Agras was crushing her opponent. It wasn't even close earlier, that just these silly mistakes, just little blunders, and in this case a huge blunder, can lead your team to defeat, though Stockholm did win the match. So unfortunately for her, she drew this instead of winning what would have been a nice game. And over to Etienne Bacro with the white pieces, Valentina Gunina. Gunina is playing in the Gibraltar Chess Challenge, Chess Masters, I forget the official name, Chess Festival. And so she had the black pieces here, and if you just count material, black is up a pawn. Black is much better here. White should be praying to make a draw, but somehow things did not go Gunina's way. And starting off on the wrong foot with rook to c8. Now, a move like rook to d8 makes perfect sense, right? Because you want your rook behind a pass pawn, and you're just defending the pawn. So this makes perfect sense. It's very logical, and white has his work cut out for him to try to make a draw. Unfortunately, rook c8 is a bad start, and the reason why is after knight to b5, the pawn a7 is under attack. Knight into d6 is a big check, hitting the king, of course, and the rook on d8, and the pawn on d5 is now directly under threat. So black has no way to defend all of these pawns at once, and the fork on d6. So a bad oversight, because after king e6, knight takes a7, rook e8, you look like you're, okay, I'm going to go sneak down and win the pawn a2, but after knight to b5, well, you're not actually just winning that pawn because knight c7 check picks off d5. So rook a2, knight c7, king f7, and now knight takes d5. Okay, black should be in no danger here. Yes, black was much better just a few moves ago, but material is level. It's rook knight in 3 versus rook knight in 3. Your king is safe. Your king is, actually fairly active, especially relative to white. So things should be okay. b5, rook b1, and now this pawn is not easy to defend because, okay, if I go to a5, I have a very passive rook, and knight c7 can always just attack this pawn. But rook d2, hitting the knight, knight f4, rook d4, knight e2, rook d2, knight g3. And okay, now white is the one going up a pawn because the pawn on b5 is now impossible to defend. Knight d3, rook takes b5, and knight e1. So g2, and if g2 falls, then maybe f3 will fall as well. But there's a bit of an issue here. So rook b7 check, check. Okay, just some checks here. That even possibly was a 3-move repetition. I'm not sure. No, I guess it just wasn't. But now knight e4. And so the problem is after rook takes g2 check, king f1, you sort of remove the guard, right? The only thing protecting the rook on g2 is the knight on e1, and if you have to move the knight, well, then you lose the rook on g2. If you move the rook, there's no way to protect the knight on e1, you lose material. So you can't take on g2, rook to a2, knight g5 check, and ouch. Rook e6 check. Sorry, that's a free pony on e1. White just wins the game. And so king e7 was a blunder. A move like king f8 kept black still in the game here because there's no check on e6 with the rook picking up the knight. g2, of course, is still under attack. And if you do move this g pawn, right, let's say g4, I always just have to move h6, kicking the knight from g5 and hitting the pawn on f3. So, yeah, it's unfortunate that king to e7 was played. I guess, king g8 is worse because it leads to checkmate in one move, rook b8 checkmate, but still, king f8 kept the fight alive. So unfortunately for Gunina, she fell victim to a tactical blunder. All right, so we have David Klein of the Amsterdam Mosquitoes playing white against Justin Tan of the London Lions. Remember, there are two London teams, and if I'm not mistaken, if my memory serves me well, the London Lions, they won their match barely, and I believe it was 8.5, 7.5. And so this game was very important. The international master with black, the grandmaster with white. Black is slightly lower rated, but end up winning this one. And the reason why is after the move g5, well, the first thing we notice is the pawn structure. White has these double pawns, black has an isolated pawn on a5, and the last move was pawn to g5, which can potentially create some problems with this pawn to h6, but it's very difficult to actually attack, especially if the king comes to g7. So sort of like both sides are doing okay. Now, I understand why white made the move that he did. So he's worried that if pawn takes c4 and this pawn takes c4 back, well, might be some issues with this pawn to c4 once the rook slides into the b4 square, hitting knight and pawn. But rook d4 does not actually protect the pawn. Sure, it literally does in the sense where if you take on c4, the rook protects that square, but c5 traps that rook right in d4. And it's very odd to see a rook trapped in the center of the board like this, but unfortunately for white, this pawn c5 is protected. Of course, this is an immediate threat. And so after this transition here, well, black is the only one with winning chances, and quite good winning chances they are, because rook f6 is an important move, stopping the rook from attacking this h6 pawn. The rook can always come to d6 behind the pass pawn, which is what you need. And okay, you got some checks in here, but black is happy to just start pushing this pawn down the board. And so Justin Tan here, he actually won quite convincingly because white is down too much material. And so here, an exchange up for black and kicking this knight away, and boom, that's game over. So unfortunately for white, you remove the protection of the d1 square, black goes on to queen, black goes on to win quite easily. So that actually, this game was not the game that won the match, but it did push the match into London's favor. So that actually is about all I got in terms of what just happened. And that was a really quick roundup that I just gave there. And we have some exciting participants later in the Atlantic Division that I'm going over doing commentary with Lawrence Trent, International Master Lawrence Trent. And here we see Robin Van Kampen of the Chess Bras. I know some of the Chess Bra fans were upset with me because they felt like I was disrespecting the Bras by saying that I felt they were weaker than last year. Once again, no offense meant. I do think they're weaker because it's hard to replace a player like Fabiano Caruana, and they didn't get a super GM to replace him, but they do have a very strong team. And this week they have Robin Van Kampen. They have Amon Hamilton. The beard is gone, but the strong chess playing isn't. So Amon will look to keep up the pressure as Montreal faces off in just about half an hour now. So the Chess Bras are looking good as the team. They're very strong despite losing some of their key players from last year. And they will look to, be a problem today. They're playing the Pittsburgh Pawn Grabbers, and I actually love the Pittsburgh Pawn Grabbers. Alex Shabalov is always fun to watch. I wonder Liang. They have a much stronger team than last year, so I'm glad they made the changes that they did. And in the later shift, we'll see Grandmaster Yu Yang Yi playing for the Chengdu Pandas. My pick is the strongest team in the Pro Chess League. They are the Pandas. They have a very cute mascot, but they're anything but nice and cuddly on the board, because they're extremely strong. And for this week, Yu Yang is playing. They have Grandmaster Wang Yue. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that name. And again, they're boasting a lineup that this week is 24.99, though not to be outdone by the San Diego Surfers, who have an average team rating just over 2,500, and that is with Alexei Dreyev, Sam Sevian, John Daniel Bryant, and Tatev Abrahamyan, my good friend Tatev Abrahamyan. So that will be an interesting match for sure. We also have Alex Lenderman repping the Montclair Sopranos. I played on the Sopranos last year. Lenderman was excellent on that team. He's been excellent this year. Really just a strong player is Alex Lenderman. He's done very well in recent months. At the World Cup, he made it to the third round. He lost to Maxime Vacher-Lagrave in the tiebreakers. He drew both games in the classical portion. He did extremely well in the Isle of Man, the Chess.com Isle of Man tournament, that is. So really well done. And for those of you in the chat saying Aman is a GM, yes, Aman Hamilton has made his Grandmaster title. It's just waiting to be approved. So I think officially he still is an International Master, but he is a Grandmaster indeed. So that is Grandmaster Hamilton. And I'm getting messages in the Twitch chat about GM Hamilton. Yes, he is. I didn't make this graphic. I'm just putting them up here. And so, yeah, we also have a great addition to the league later, and that's Grandmaster Hikaru Nakamura playing for the Seattle Sluggers. The Sluggers were very popular in the U.S. Chess League, which predated the Pro Chess League. And he, I believe he played in Seattle in the past. Last year, though, in the Pro Chess League, he played for Miami. And the Miami champions, I actually was able to speak with their managers. They are back and ready for action this year. They did lose Nakamura. They lost Lenny Dominguez as well, if I'm not mistaken. But they are not afraid of anybody. So they're, they'll definitely be in contention. So I was just asked in the chat, what do you expect from the All St. Louis affair? And I'm very excited for it. Both teams are, they seem both teams excited for battle. I've talked to players from both sides, and that's going to be a great match. And so I talked to the managers of the Webster Windmills, Priyadarshan Kanapan, I'm sorry again if I'm mispronouncing the name, and Eric Rosen. And they both gave me a bit of a different take on their match. But they are playing the St. Louis Archbishops. And St. Louis is the defending champions. They lost last week to Minnesota Blizzard, and they're going with their top-heavy line again. We see Grandmaster Vladimir Fedoseev, who's over 2,700, Varuzhin Akobian, and Yaroslav Zherbuk, manning the top three boards for St. Louis. For Webster, you have Grandmaster Corey, Grandmaster Shimanov, and Grandmaster Ray Robson. And then Talia Cervantes on board 4. Her FIDE rating is 2110 for the purposes of this league, but it seems that she's quite a bit underrated. She's had some good performances recently. She's young, and so Webster is definitely a strong team. And to me, it depends because I would imagine the top three players, the Grandmasters, are just going to beat up on the board 4s, and that's sort of standard when you see such high-rated top few players like the person on screen, Hikaru Nakamura. You have very high players at the top, then you have a huge drop-off on board 4, so you really want your board 4 to score even a half point against the top 3, and then when the board 4 matchup, you need your board 4 to score, and that's often vital. But score prediction for that top board, oh gosh, you're really putting me on the spot here. I'm going to go with 9 to 7 St. Louis. So I'm surprised that I'm even 9 to 7 seems, quite a decent margin because 8.5, 7.5 is the closest score. But I really like St. Louis's top 3. I think they're very strong at the top, and I think just that the difference between, let's say, a player like Fedoseev and a player like Corey, that's a huge difference on board 1, and Varuzhin Akobian is an exceptional rapid and speed chess player, whereas I feel like, yes, Corey, Shimanov, and Robson are definitely powerhouses themselves, but I just think that the edge belongs to St. Louis in that one. They're defending champions, and they did lose last week, so they don't want to lose again. So let's see. What's going on in the chat here? Okay, people talking about Aman Hamilton. Of course, they're talking about him in the Twitch chat, in the Chess.com chat. Wesley used to play for St. Louis. That is true. GM Blue Wizard. I'm not sure who you are, but thank you for tuning in. Who's GM Blue Wizard? Grandmaster Dennis Boros, who is playing for Webster. Wesley used to play for St. Louis. Wesley, I believe, is focusing on the candidates and currently in Tata Steel, but I don't want to put words in Wesley's mouth. And yeah, let's see what other matchups we have that are interesting. Pittsburgh versus Montreal. I just love that matchup. That's probably my favorite matchup of the night. I'm glad I get to do commentary on that because, as I noted, I'm a big fan of the various chess bras and also a big fan of Alex Shabalov. He's just such a fun player to watch. Even if he loses, he always goes down swinging, and he's not one of the players you'll see playing kind of strategic chess. I mean, he obviously has strategy, but he loves that tactical, the tactical battle. So Shaba is manning the top board. Board 2 is A Wonder Liang. I don't have graphics for them. I wish I did, but unfortunately I don't. And A Wonder Liang will be on board 2. That's Grandmaster A Wonder Liang with International Master Attilio Shetty, and then Micah Bratton on board 4. He's 2381 FIDE. So quite a strong lineup. And then for the chess bras, we have, as I showed, Robin Van Kampen on board 1. We have Amon Hamilton on board 3. And this is, again, now Grandmaster Amon Hamilton, Grandmaster-elect, but officially still an International Master, which is why it says I am in the graphic. As soon as it's official, he will become GM Amon on this graphic. And I don't make them, so don't blame me. Renier Castellanos on board 2, 2481 FIDE, and then Michael Kleiman on board 4. So similar names to last week for both teams. It looks like one change apiece. We see Robin Van Kampen on the top board for the bras and Amon Hamilton on board 3. So those are the chess bras that we want to keep an eye on. And in Buenos Aires versus Minnesota. So Minnesota, I actually picked. That was me mixing picked and predicted into one word. I predicted that they would upset St. Louis. I said it before the match in the highlight show, the halftime show. And, they did defeat St. Louis, a big upset. People were surprised. And now we see that this week that Minnesota plays Buenos Aires. And Buenos Aires is a strong team, 2492 average, just below the cutoff of 2500. Sandro Mareco on board 1, 2650 FIDE. And then they have players, you drops to 2514, 2445, and 2362. So strong all around. Players that can defeat anyone. That's, I sort of like that, where you have a strong Grandmaster on board 1, another Grandmaster on board 2, and then international masters who can compete with the very best. And Minnesota, they're bringing out GM Mauricio Flores. They have, technically still international master Andrew Tang, but Grandmaster-elect, just like Amon Hamilton. International Master Daniel Gurevich, and International Master Sean Nagel. So Minnesota varies from 25-29 on board 1 to 24-32 on board 4. So very close in terms of the rating differential from top to bottom. And as we saw last week, they can start nicking points off of the stronger teams. And I think Buenos Aires is a good match for them because unlike St. Louis, which is very, very top heavy, Buenos Aires actually kind of mirrors Minnesota in many ways with, I guess they have a stronger Grandmaster on board 1, but in that 2500 down to 2360 kind of mid-level that's you'd want to see as a board 3 and board 4, but very strong because they're anchored by Sandro Mareco. And the last match in this group is the Montclair Sopranos versus the Miami Champions. And want to bring back Lenderman as we talk about his upcoming match. Grandmaster Lenderman, I mentioned, is very, very strong, is having a great year, or I should say had a great 2017. And his team is rounded out with Anatoly Baikovsky, Nicholas Cheka, young international master, and Advait Patel. So International Master Advait Patel, I believe, has 2 Grandmaster norms. I just played him in the North American Open. Very talented youngster. Here, for the league purposes, 2430 rated, but his rating is now somewhere like 2480. And so he's a very, very strong player, and you should keep an eye out on him. And so, let's see, looking through back to the chats, any more questions? Please ask questions, anything you want to have answered. I'm willing to make predictions on the future matches. And now that we're done with the Sopranos, we should move on to the Miami Champions. Eduardo Iturizaga, Yunieski Quesada, Julio Becerra Rivero. So 3 GMs in the top 3 boards. And a big welcome back to their board 4, Nicholas Rosenthal. So a new addition this week. He was a free agent. Last year, he played for St. Louis. And for those of you who were following last year, he defeated Maxime Vachier-Lagrave and had many upsets along the way. It was a very promising board four, one who could contend with even the strongest players in the world. So that was a surprising showing by him, but clearly he's capable of getting the upsets. Who's my Super Bowl prediction? Nitrous oxide. I really want the Eagles to win. I can't stand the Patriots winning once again, but it's hard to go against the Pats. It depends if Gronkowski's playing, but okay, we can get into these kind of conversations later when I'm not talking about chess. And no graphics from Buenos Aires. I probably have one somewhere, but unfortunately don't have one currently on me that I can put up. And question was, how does it feel being a grandmaster? Feels pretty good. Right now feels a little hungry, a little thirsty as well. And question, what do I think about the Chengdu team? I love that team. That team is amazingly strong. I was actually about to start talking about this Pacific Division. So while I do that, let me bring back Mr. Yu Yang Yi here. So we can start with that matchup. Chengdu, I was just mentioning 24.99 playing 25.04 San Diego Surfers. That's a great matchup. I should probably be going to sleep at some point tonight, but if that match is on, I'll be watching it. That's going to be really exciting stuff. We have San Jose Hackers versus Australia Kangaroos. I like Australia. They're a fun new team, seem very, very dedicated. And the San Jose Hackers have probably the best logo in the Pro Chess League. Maybe not anymore, but I love their logo. I think it's very well done. And they are mixing it up this week. They have Rauf Mamedov on board 1, Zviad Azoria board 2, Faik Leskarov on board 3, 23.15, and then 23.01 rated Timu Virtanen. That sounds like a Finnish name. And yeah, so I would say the top favors San Jose for sure between Mamedov and Azoria against Alexei Sarana and Anton Smirnov. They're playing a little bit younger grandmasters. And the experience, the higher rating definitely favors San Jose. But on the bottom two boards, well, you have a 24.73 IM for Australia, Kanan Izzat, and so he's much higher rated than the last two for San Jose. So I think it's a pretty balanced matchup. I'm going to go with San Jose winning that one. Let's go. I'm going to go 9.5. And how do I do math here? 9.5, 6.5. I think San Jose just has it. I like Rauf Mamedov. His official rating for the league is 2678, but currently he's above 2700. And the Seattle Sluggers, they face off against the Las Vegas Desert Rats. So bring back Hikaru Nakamura. He leads the way for the Sluggers. You have Georgi Margvelashvili on board 2, 2530 GM. You have Bryce Tigalon on board 3, international master, young, talented player. And Anthony He, FIDE Master, 2281 on board 4. So it's really going to be all about Nakamura. If Nakamura can go 4-0, then they have great chances. But over there on the Las Vegas side, you have Lenier Dominguez. And so these players were teammates last year, if I'm not mistaken, on Miami. Now they are mortal enemies, at least for tonight. And so you have Lenier Dominguez, you have Melek Khachian, who performed well last week for the Desert Rats. You have Andrei Ostrovsky. Andrei Ostrovsky is a popular streamer on Twitch, and he is also an international master rated 2444. And Nazi Paikidze. Nazi is the former U.S. Women's Champion. She won that title right before Sabina Forscher, and so she's 2352 international master. And she was tweeting earlier, very excited to play Hikaru Nakamura in the first match. And last but not least, the Dallas Destiny and the Rio Grande Ospreys. I didn't make a prediction for the Sluggers and Desert Rats. I like the Desert Rats. I think they're a stronger team. Seattle's a bit younger, and for some reason, I don't like the inexperience in this one. You tend to think that younger players are better at speed chess, but despite having Nakamura, despite having the younger players, it's just, I don't think it's happening for Seattle. I think Las Vegas wins that one 9-7. And all right, let's see. Yeah, people are talking about Gibraltar. Yeah, Hikaru's playing from Gibraltar. He actually is playing extremely well in Gibraltar. He beat Gunina yesterday in a 135-move battle. Today he beat Federico Perez Ponce, or Ponce Perez, I forget which the order is, but he beat him in a very nice game. So Nakamura is doing well, trying to get his 4th Gibraltar title in a row. And back to the Dallas Destiny. Have we looked at the standings? No, great question. I can bring those standings up. That's a great point. Why am I doing this with Nakamura on screen when I can put the standings up here? So let me get the standings for everybody, and so you don't have to just hear my voice. Okay, and standings, here we go. So the Eastern Division is, as you see here, Estonia Horses out to 2-0 start, Delhi Dynamite 1.5, Mumbai Movers also at 1.5, and Norway Gnome. So those 4, if the season ended today, would be in the playoffs. And Riga is down there at the bottom, not doing in great shape, along with Volga, Stormbringers. Both teams have lost their opening 2 matches. And over there in the Central Division, sorry, trying to catch everything, we have the Stockholm Snowballs out in first. They were a good team last year. They're a good team once more. Marseille Migraines. The Reykjavik Puffins. Everybody loves the Puffins. They're just a fun team. They have good team chemistry. And the team that I always have difficulty pronouncing, the Ljubljana, I think I fixed it, Turtles. And I love their mascot. I love that they have Raphael, Donatello, all the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Huge fan of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles growing up, so I love that. And as we scroll down here, we see Cannes, London at 1, and the other London, the Towers and the Amsterdam Mosquitoes are the tail enders here. They're bringing up the rear. And so in the Atlantic and the Pacific, we see Webster 1-0, and this Atlantic Division is happening in 10 minutes, so stay on. I'm going to actually take a short break in a second, and then International Master Lawrence Trent and I will have the call. And thankfully, I'll have a partner because speaking alone is difficult. But Webster Windmills, Pittsburgh Pawn Grabbers, the Chess Bras of Montreal, and the Minnesota Blizzard, as you can see, lead here. And over there in the Pacific, you have Chengdu, San Jose, Seattle, Dallas. And I was just actually mentioning Dallas's matchup. Dallas is playing Rio Grande. Very even match. Julio Sidora, Conrad Holt, Andre Gorovitz at the top for Dallas. At the end there, Stephen Breckenridge, he plays and streams here on Chess.com, I believe, and on Twitch. Joshua Ruiz, Guillermo Vasquez, 2 international masters for Rio Grande. Grandmasters Carlos Hevia and Camille Dragoon for Rio Grande. So 2 Grandmasters, 2 international masters for Rio Grande, 3 GMs, and an FM for Dallas. So pretty tight matchup. I'm going 8-8. That's my prediction for a tie. I don't really like predicting ties. I want to see teams win, but I think that match will be a tie. So I'm going to go on a break here. I need a short rest. I need to chow down on a nutritional, I don't know, let me get a Cliff Bar from my closet or something. And I will be back in 5 minutes with the call. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in for this halftime show. And yes, Lawrence Trent and I will be together. So, all right, signing off for a little bit. Please stay on. We'll be back in just about 7 minutes or so, and we'll be back for the Atlantic Division of the Pro Chess League.